Have you ever said something creepy as a kid that scared your parents? When I was very young, I was really close with two family members. Grandpa and Poppy John, my dad's dad and Grandma's dad respectfully. Poppy John died when I was 2 and Grandpa when I was 3. When I was 4, my mom and I were home alone. She was in the living room watching a movie I think, when she heard me having a full conversation with someone coming from our long hallway. She comes in and sees me sitting against the wall looking up at something and talking. She asked me who I was talking to, and I had said, I'm talking to Grandpa and Poppy John. All happy and normal. To this day, she will tell this story and get goosebumps from it. Not me, but my sister. She used to sleepwalk when she was little and one night, she walked into my parents' room. My mom walked her back to her room, but she wouldn't go back to bed. When my mom asked why, she said, I have to help her. When my mom asked who, my sister said her and pointed to the corner behind my mom. Needless to say, my mom got out of there pretty quick. We asked her in the morning what happened, and my sister said she was having a nightmare about having to save her friend. Creepy nonetheless. For me it was when I was like 3 or 4 years old. I remember telling my aunt, through 3 or 4-year-old baby talk, that I was flying some feet off the ground, and from above, I saw my mom and dad in a restaurant through a window. I could also see my dad's black truck he owned when I was a kid, parked right outside the restaurant. When all of a sudden, 3 men with bats come up to the truck and start hitting it, and my dad comes out and starts fighting them. My aunt said, "That's cool, sweetie," and I went back to playing with my toys. It wasn't until years later when I was like 15 that my parents had a dinner party with some friends and they started to talk about paranormal stuff. My mom said, Edgar scared us when he was younger, then she proceeded to tell the story I told my aunt when I was a kid and finished saying, nobody ever told Edgar this story, and the thing is that, it actually happened. The guy that beat his dad's truck was my ex-boyfriend who brought 2 of his buddies to beat both his dad's truck and his dad because the guy was still mad I broke up with him. But the really scary part is that Edgar wasn't even born yet when it happened, and that was actually his dad and my first date. My daughter had just been learning to speak, she was maybe 2 years old. We were walking her around the block, pointing at different things and teaching her their names, while she would babble along and try to say them with us, and waving hello as people would walk by. As we were walking along, she points at one of our neighbors sitting in his front yard, and she looks at me and says, "Die," spelling out die. I said, "What?" Thinking it was just her stringing random letters together and not meaning anything. She said it again clear as day, "Die," so I just rubbed it off and we kept walking. Doug passed away a couple of days after that. Had one weird occurrence when I was around 3 years old, I'm 23 now. When I was younger, my dad would usually have to take business trips once or twice a month, so my mom and I were often in our house, at the time, by ourselves. So one night while my dad was out of town, my mom was getting me ready to go to sleep after bathing me, and she had me sitting on the corner of their bed. Now, the way the house was set up at the time, my parents' room was at the very end of the hall, and from where I was sitting on the corner of the bed, I could stare directly down the hallway. Supposedly, while my mom was drying my hair, I stopped her randomly and said, "Mommy, who owns the house?" And she said she looked at me and said, "Well, Mommy and Daddy own the house." And I proceeded to point down the hallway and tell her no, the man just told me that he owns the house. She said she checked the entire house and just ended up being a little spooked about it. Nothing happened before or after that. But she loves telling the story and never tells it any differently. I have a lot of vivid memories of my childhood, but this one sticks with me because I was so terrified after it happened, and I still can't debunk it. I've lived in the same house my entire life and I don't believe it's haunted. For context, my house goes bedrooms to hallway to living room to kitchen. I was about 6 or 7 and I got up, and I was really excited to play in a fort I made the night before in my living room. It was a small fort made out of sheets, but if I laid down, I could see the entrance to the kitchen. I brought some toys in there and was playing with them. I was playing and I heard someone coming from the bedrooms, and I wanted to be sneaky and pull a, see, you couldn't even tell I was in the fort. I thought it was my mom at first because the steps were very light. But I saw feet come into view and it wasn't my mom. The toenails were a little unkempt and cracked, and the feet were definitely a man's. I immediately assumed it was my dad because it has an older man's feet. I know my dad had weird toenails and they weren't my brothers as they were just kids at the time. So the feet walked in front of my fort, stopped in and turned to me as if they were looking at the fort because they could tell I was hiding. The feet stood there for a couple seconds, then turned away towards the kitchens. I thought since he turned towards me, he was going to say bye before he went to work, so I waited a couple minutes and he didn't come, so I got up to go say bye. I walked into the kitchen and my mom was sitting alone at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Confused, I asked her where dad was. He left for work hours ago and I said, no, that can't be true, I just saw him a few minutes ago. My mom was like, no you didn't? Because he's not here. I got really scared and was trying to come up with an explanation. I thought maybe my brother's friends slept over and they had weird looking feet, but that wasn't that case either. I don't think she really believed me at the time since I was so young, but I'm in my 20s now and I still bring it up that I am 1000% sure I did not make it up and somebody walked in front of my fort. When I was a toddler, the main bedroom of our house had a large sliding glass door. My parents are weird and didn't like putting down the curtains. Without curtains, it was just a dark void you'd be staring at during the night. I really hate not having the curtains drawn because of this story. Anyways, my dad was watching me as we sat on the bed. He said I had turned around toward the glass door and started bouncing around playfully and kept saying, look. Look. He turned and saw nothing but darkness. I told him, there's a little boy jumping and waving his arms, can't you see him? My dad, as he recalled, was scared out of his mind. Another time that I actually remember was when I saw a shadow man or boy walking outside the glass door in the moonlight. I wasn't scared at all. Just curious. I remember waking up at 3 a.m. and peeking outside the curtains, which were completely closed, to see the man just walk by the door and disappear into the side gate. I told my family the next day and they all quickly dismissed me and told me I saw the dog or something. There was no man. They have since accepted the fact that we were haunted. When my son was a toddler, we lived in a really old house that had an addition. The back entrance was what we called the den and was the original cottage. One day my son and I were sitting in the kitchen and he said, oh, I see the man. I was like, what man? He said, the man that lives in there. He points to the den and I asked him where he was in the room. He told me he wasn't there anymore, but he saw his reflection in the window. He's said so many little things, I wish I'd written them down. He doesn't see or hear much anymore, but still comes out with random little surprises. One day this November, he told me it was going to snow today. I was like, wishful thinking buddy. It doesn't snow around here until January. Lo and behold, a little snow shower came through that afternoon that wasn't even in the forecast. I remember feeling like people watched me as a child, but never saw any of them. I did wake up to a hand reaching from under my bed. That one terrified me for a bit. My mom kept telling me it was just a dream, so I eventually came to terms with that. Until I read another comment on here about hands reaching for them. A little older, I was 16 and had a dream I was at a park by my house. In the dream, I noticed a plane in the sky that looked like it was about to crash. 2 days later, the Flight 800 crash happened about 20 miles from my house. The plane I saw would not have been traveling the route I saw the plane fly, but the missile that it rumored to have hit it would have. Once when I was a toddler, I refused to use the bathroom in a base my dad was stationed in. I used to tell her that there was a headless man in the bathroom and that he scared me. It was in a remote part of my country so flights didn't come as often, maybe 1 or 2 times a week if we were lucky, and we were staying there for the holidays. I was 5 or 6 years old and it was a nice sunny summer weekend. I was sitting on the couch in the living room and the couch was up against this large window. The TV was off and nobody was in the room. I was paralyzed with fear and sunk down in the couch, so no part of me was visible to anyone or anything outside the window. I could sense and feel this horrible ominous dark presence outside on the sidewalk at the end of the front yard under the tree. This was the 80s and of course parents demanded kids to be outside playing like my sister was. My mom came into the living room and demanded what I was doing inside and why was I not outside playing on this wonderful sunny day. I whispered to her quietly as I could that I could not go outside because he is watching me. Of course my mom demanded to know who is watching me and I pointed behind me without raising my hand above the couch and I told her the guy in black out in the front yard under the tree. My mom became very quiet and was looking outside through the window, and upon seeing nobody out there, she kept looking at me and outside and finally said quietly that nobody is out there and walked out of the living room. I know I scared her so deeply. I could sense it and feel it so tangibly. I will never forget that moment in my life. I remember it so vividly and still get freaked out and goosebumps every time I think of that moment in my life. My parents bought an old mountain cabin for an absurdly low price. The owners gave it at the asking price and left everything behind. My parents, who generally don't believe in spirits, soon came to believe there was something else in the house. The lights would turn off, things would be opened, and once a bag of grapes was thrown on the floor. My parents felt it was harmless and lived with the ghost while on vacation. My daughter took a trip there when she was 7. Her cousin fell asleep in the bed with her, and while she laid there awake, she said, just thinking about stuff, and said she saw 3 figures. She claims to this day they were walking in line from smallest to biggest. They all had hoods, and they were all black and kind of see-through. She said they didn't seem to do anything, and they eventually disappeared. She was too afraid to even scream or move. She also said there was a ghost in my parents' home. She said she has seen her in the window from outside, that she has 2 braids, and she is see-through like the shadow men, but not dark. She said she is little and she watched her play tetherball. She isn't afraid of the ghost girl, but she said she doesn't like the shadow men. She's 9 years old now, and it does creep me out a little.